Thomas stood in the grand chamber, his uniform perfectly pressed, his boots shining like mirrors. He was nervous. His hands felt cold even though the air around him was warm. Earth's military leaders had chosen him for this mission, to marry Empress Catherine of the Galactic Empire. It was supposed to be simple. A political marriage. A peace treaty. Nothing more. He had read the files. The Empress was 710 years old. She had ruled the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. Thomas thought she would be old, tired, maybe even cruel. He expected to see someone ancient and broken, barely able to stand. He was very wrong. The great doors of the crystal chamber opened. Music filled the air, strange, beautiful music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Thousands of beings from 1,000 different worlds watched as she entered. Empress Catherine descended the long staircase slowly, and Thomas could not look away. She was magnificent. Her long silver-white hair flowed like water, catching the light of the stars that shone through the transparent walls. She wore robes made of materials that seemed to shift and glow with colors that had no names. Her amber eyes were bright and sharp, full of intelligence and power. She did not look 710 years old. She looked timeless. "Soldier Thomas," she said as she reached him. Her voice was smooth and strong like music and thunder combined. "You honor your world by standing here." Thomas tried to speak but his throat felt dry. He managed a small nod and a respectful bow. The Empress smiled slightly and he felt his heart beat faster. The ceremony was long and complicated. There were rituals from 100 different alien cultures. Priests and priestesses from different species spoke words and languages Thomas did not understand. He repeated vows that translators whispered into his ear. Rings were exchanged. His was simple gold, hers was made of something that sparkled like frozen starlight. Through it all he could feel the Empress watching him. Not with anger or sadness but with curiosity. As if she was studying him, trying to understand who he really was underneath the uniform and the fear. Finally the ceremony ended. The crowd cheered. If cheering was the right word for the strange sounds made by so many different alien voices. Thomas and Catherine were declared married. They were led through endless corridors of crystal and light toward the imperial suite. The other soldiers had warned him about this part. They had told him stories and made jokes. But now that he was actually here, walking beside this ancient and powerful empress, he felt completely unprepared. What would she expect from him? What would he be required to do? The imperial suite was enormous. It was bigger than most buildings Thomas had ever seen. One wall was completely transparent, showing thousands of stars. There were gardens that seemed to grow in impossible directions, with plants from worlds Thomas had never heard of. Fountains flowed with water that looked like liquid diamonds. "This will be your home now," Catherine said, walking toward a large window. "At least for a time." Thomas followed her. Up close, he could see that she was not entirely human, though she was more human than many of the aliens he had seen. Her skin had a faint shimmer to it, like mother of pearl. Her eyes were slightly too large and they held colors that seemed to move and change. "Empress," he said carefully, "I want to understand why I am here. Earth was told this is a peace treaty. But there must be more to it than that." Catherine turned to face him. For a long moment she said nothing. She simply looked at him, and Thomas felt as if she could see into his mind, could see all his thoughts and fears. "You are very direct," she said finally. "I appreciate that. So many people dance around the truth with words and flattery. They are afraid." She walked to a chair and sat down with perfect grace. "Sit, Thomas. We should talk." Thomas sat across from her, keeping his back straight and his hands calm, even though inside he felt like his nerves were screaming. "The galaxy is very large," Catherine began, "and it has been my responsibility to keep it safe and peaceful for 710 years. I have fought wars. I have built cities. I have made treaties with 1,000 different species." She paused, looking out at the stars. "But there are problems that even an empress cannot solve alone." "What kind of problems?" Thomas asked. Catherine stood and walked to the window. Her reflection in the glass looked sad, Thomas thought. Lonely. "My people," she said quietly, "are dying. It is a genetic problem. It has been happening slowly for centuries. My species cannot have children anymore. We cannot create new life. In a few generations we will be gone completely." Thomas felt a chill run through him. He understood suddenly why he had been chosen. This was not just a political marriage. This was about survival. "The Council thinks you can help," Catherine continued. "They believe that your people, humanity, might hold answers in your genetics. They think that perhaps a human child raised as part of the Empire could help save my species." Thomas stood up. His legs felt unsteady. You married me because you want a child? Catherine turned from the window. Her amber eyes looked at him with something that might have been sadness, or might have been hope. I married you because you were brave enough to come to a strange world. I married you because your people are known for their honor and their strength. But yes, Thomas, I need you to understand the truth. This marriage is not just about peace between our worlds. It is about saving my entire civilization. The chamber seemed to grow smaller. Thomas felt the weight of this responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. He was just a soldier. He had never asked to be part of something this important. What if I cannot help? He asked. Catherine smiled sadly. Then we will face the future together anyway. And that alone would be more than I have had in 710 years. The first morning after the wedding, Thomas woke to find Catherine already gone. The enormous bed beside him was cold. He rose and dressed in the clothes that had been left for him, simple robes made of soft material that felt like silk but moved like water. He wandered through the imperial suite, trying to understand this strange new life. He found Catherine in a massive chamber filled with holographic displays. Images of star systems floated in the air around her. Ships moved across maps of space. Numbers and symbols flashed in languages Thomas did not recognize. Catherine stood in the center of it all, her hands moving through the holograms as if conducting an invisible orchestra. "Good morning, Thomas," she said without turning around. "I trust you slept well." "I did," Thomas replied, though it was not entirely true. He had been too nervous to sleep properly. "What are you doing?" "Working," Catherine answered simply. "The Empire does not stop simply because I am married. 3 star systems need mediation regarding trade disputes. The Zarthon fleet is requesting permission to expand their territory. A scientific colony on Kepler-16 has discovered something unusual in their mining operations. And there is a disease spreading through the outer territories that requires investigation." Thomas watched as Catherine continued her work. She spoke to various advisors through holographic communications. She made decisions that affected millions of lives. She settled arguments between alien species who had been enemies for centuries. She was not sitting idle like some trophy wife. She was ruling an empire. For the next 3 days, Thomas followed Catherine through her daily duties. He attended council meetings where she negotiated trade agreements. He watched her speak to military commanders about maintaining peace across vast distances. He saw her make difficult choices about resource allocation and territorial disputes. She was brilliant, commanding, and completely absorbed in her work. On the 4th day something changed. Thomas found Catherine alone on the observation deck, standing in front of the transparent wall that showed the stars. Her shoulders were slightly hunched. Her hand gripped the railing tightly, and Thomas could see that it was trembling. "Empress?" he called softly, not wanting to startle her. Catherine did not turn around immediately. When she finally did, Thomas saw something he had not expected to see. Weakness. Vulnerability. "Bang. Are you well?" he asked, moving closer. Catherine's jaw tightened. "I have been many things in my long life, Thomas. I was a warrior. I conquered 17 star systems before I was 100 years old. I was a builder. I created cities and monuments that will stand for thousands of years. I was a mediator. I brought peace between species that had fought for millennia." She paused, her amber eyes looking away toward the infinite stars. "But I have never been vulnerable. I have never been afraid." Thomas did not know what to say. He waited, sensing that she needed to continue. "Do you know why I never married before you?" Catherine asked. "In 710 years I have had many chances. Many powerful beings wanted to stand beside me. But I refused them all. I refused because I did not want anyone to know my weakness." She turned to face him fully now, and Thomas could see the strain in her face. There was exhaustion there beyond simple tiredness. There was something deeper, something that cut into her very being. "My people," Catherine said slowly, "do not age like yours do. We live for centuries. We should live forever. But something is wrong with us now. It started 300 years ago. My scientists first noticed it then. Births became rarer. Children became fewer. Now." She trailed off, her voice breaking slightly. "Now, no children have been born to my species in over 50 years. Thomas felt the weight of what she was telling him. "What happens to your people?" he asked. "We die," Catherine said simply. "Slowly, one by one, my species fades away. My entire civilization, everything I have built, everything I am, it will all end. In perhaps 2 or 3 more generations, there will be no Zalthari left in the universe. We will be extinct." She sat down on a bench and Thomas could see that she was trembling now. Not from fear but from the burden of carrying this knowledge alone for so long. Does anyone else know? Thomas asked, sitting beside her. My closest advisors know, Catherine replied. And the greatest scientists of my empire. We have kept it secret because if the other species knew that we were dying, they would not respect us anymore. They would see us as weak. Our treaties would mean nothing. Within weeks, our enemies would attack. Our allies would abandon us. Chaos would spread across the galaxy like a disease. Thomas understood then why the marriage had happened so suddenly. Why he had been chosen. It was not just about peace between worlds. It was about survival. Is there no cure? He asked. Catherine shook her head. My scientists have tried everything. They have studied our genetics. They have searched ancient records of our ancestors. They have experimented with every medical treatment we know. She looked at Thomas with tired eyes. Then one of my advisors had an idea. They studied your species. They found something interesting in human genetics, something ancient, something that should not be there. Genetic material that appears to be from a civilization that existed millions of years ago. A civilization that seeded the galaxy with different species. She stood up and began to pace. The theory is that human genetics might contain the key to saving my people. That perhaps, through careful genetic research we could find a cure. That perhaps a child born from both human and Zalthari would have the genetic diversity needed to stop our decline. Is that why you married me? Thomas asked quietly. Catherine stopped pacing and looked at him. Partly, she said. But not entirely. I married you because you were brave. Because your people understand honor. Because I was tired of being alone. She sat beside him again. And because I needed someone I could trust with this truth. Someone who would not try to use it against me for power. Thomas reached out and took her hand. It was trembling still, but he held it firmly. You are not alone anymore, he said. Thomas was searching for historical records about the Zalthari civilization when he found the hidden archive. It was buried deep within the Imperial computer system, protected by layers of security codes that he should not have been able to break. But Catherine had given him access to almost everything in the palace, and his military training in code breaking proved useful. The files he discovered made his blood run cold. They were marked with the highest level of secrecy. They contained communications between members of Catherine's council, conversations that had been hidden from the Empress herself. Thomas read message after message, and with each one his anger grew hotter. The council was planning something terrible. According to the files, they had known about Catherine's genetic condition for far longer than she believed. They had also been planning what to do about it for years. The plan was simple and brutal. If Catherine's condition worsened, if no cure was found through the marriage to Thomas, they would blame him. They would blame humanity. The council would announce to the galaxy that the human genetic material had somehow made Catherine's condition worse, not better. They would claim that the marriage had been a mistake. They would say that humans were incompatible with Zalthari DNA. Then, using this false claim as justification, they would launch a massive invasion of Earth. They would seize human resources. They would enslave the human population. They would take what they wanted and destroy anyone who resisted. Thomas found invasion plans. He found military strategies. He found lists of ships and weapons that were being secretly assembled. He found evidence that the council had been preparing for this war for over a year, long before Catherine had ever agreed to marry him. He was not a savior. He was a scapegoat. And when the plan failed, his entire species would pay the price. Thomas's hands shook as he downloaded copies of all the files. He needed to show Catherine. He needed to warn her. He needed to understand how the people closest to her could betray her so completely. He found Catherine in her private chambers. She was alone, which was rare. Usually, advisors and servants surrounded her constantly. She looked up from the book she was reading, an ancient text about Zalthari history, and smiled when she saw him. Thomas, she said warmly, I was hoping you would come. I have been reading about. They are planning to invade Earth, Thomas said, his voice cold and hard. Your council. They are planning to blame me for your genetic decline. They are planning to destroy my entire civilization. Catherine's expression changed instantly. The warmth disappeared. Her eyes became sharp and dangerous. Show me, she commanded. Thomas transferred the files to the holographic display system. Images and text floated in the air between them. Catherine stood and studied each file carefully. Thomas watched her face as she read about the conspiracy. He saw rage build behind her amber eyes. He saw betrayal. He saw the weight of realizing that the people she had trusted for centuries were willing to destroy an entire species for their own gain. "How did you find these?" she asked quietly. "I was searching historical records," Thomas explained. "The security codes were complex but not impossible. I think they did not expect anyone to look. They probably thought the files were safe." Catherine turned away from the displays. She walked to her window and stared out at the stars. For a long time she said nothing. Thomas waited, unsure what she was thinking, unsure if she was angry at him for discovering this or angry at her council for their betrayal. Finally, Catherine spoke. "I need to tell you something, Thomas. And I need you to trust me completely when I do." Thomas nodded, though he felt confused and afraid. Catherine turned back to face him. "I knew," she said simply. Thomas felt like the ground beneath him had disappeared. "What?" "I knew about the conspiracy," Catherine continued. "I did not know all the details, but I suspected. I have ruled for 710 years, Thomas. I have learned to read people. I have learned to see patterns. For months I noticed small things. Advisors meeting in private. Ships being moved without my approval. Supply orders that did not match official records. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room." She walked toward him slowly. "I did not know exactly what they were planning, but I knew something was wrong. So I did something I had never done before in my entire reign. I acted vulnerable. I told them about my genetic condition. I announced that I would marry a human. I gave them exactly what they wanted, a scapegoat." Thomas felt confused and angry all at once. "Why? Why would you do that?" "Because I needed to know who my enemies were," Catherine said. "I needed to see who would betray me. And I needed someone I could truly trust." She looked directly into his eyes. "I married you precisely because I foresaw this treachery. I needed an ally who had no stake in this empire's politics. Someone who could not be bought or threatened by my council. Someone with nothing to gain from power here on this world." She moved closer and took his hands. "I chose you because you were brave enough to come to a strange world. Because your people understand honor. Because when I looked at your military record, I saw someone who would stand against corruption, no matter the cost." Thomas tried to process what she was saying. "So this was all planned? You wanted me to discover this?" "No," Catherine said firmly. "I did not expect you to find these files. I had other plans, other ways to expose the conspiracy. But I am glad you found them. It means I was right about you. It means you will stand with me, not against me, when we reveal this truth to the Empire." She released his hands and walked back to the holographic displays. "Tomorrow we present this evidence to the full Imperial Senate. We expose these conspirators for what they are. And we show the galaxy that humans and Zalthari can work together, not as predator and prey but as true allies." Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders again. But this time it felt different. This time he was not alone. The Imperial Senate chamber was massive and filled with tension. Thousands of beings from 100 different species sat in tiered rows that stretched up toward a ceiling so high it seemed to touch the sky itself. Empress Catherine stood at the center, and beside her stood Thomas in his human military uniform. Behind them, holographic displays showed the evidence of the conspiracy. Catherine's voice was calm and clear as she presented the files to the Senate. She showed them the invasion plans. She showed them the communications between council members. She showed them the lies that had been told, the resources that had been stolen, the military preparations that had been hidden. The Senate erupted into chaos. Some senators shouted in anger at the betrayal. Some demanded justice immediately. Others stood and walked out, refusing to listen further. The conspirators, high-ranking council members who had served the Empress for centuries, denied everything. They claimed the files were false. They claimed Thomas had fabricated the evidence. They claimed that Catherine was being manipulated by a human spy. But Catherine had prepared well. She presented witness testimony from her most loyal scientists. She showed financial records proving the conspiracy. She revealed communications between the conspirators and military commanders. The evidence was too strong to deny. Within hours, the conspirators were arrested. The Senate voted to investigate the military for any involvement in the plot. Chaos spread through the Empire as different factions began to take sides. Some remained loyal to Catherine. Others sided with the conspirators, believing they represented a better future for the Zalthari. Some demanded that humanity be punished for the so-called manipulation of the Empress. War was beginning to tear the Empire apart. In the midst of this chaos, Catherine's chief scientist, a brilliant Zalthari named Devon, came to her with extraordinary news. He had been studying the genetic files that Thomas had downloaded from the conspiracy archives. Hidden within those files was ancient genetic data, information about human DNA that the conspirators had been studying in secret. "Empress," Devon said, his voice filled with excitement and wonder, "I have discovered something remarkable. The human genetic material contains sequences that should not exist. They appear to be millions of years old. They match no known evolutionary pattern." "What does this mean?" Catherine asked. "It means," Devon said slowly, "that humans were not created by natural evolution alone. Someone or something seeded your galaxy with genetic templates. The humans, the Zalthari, and dozens of other species all carry traces of this ancient genetic engineering." Thomas listened carefully as Devon explained his discovery. The ancient precursor civilization had created a genetic master key, a blueprint hidden in specific species across the galaxy. This master key contained the ability to save species that face genetic decline. And humans, it seemed, possessed the most complete and powerful version of this key. "Can we use this to save the Zalthari?" Catherine asked. Devon nodded slowly. "Perhaps. In theory, if we combine human genetic material with Zalthari genetics in a very specific way, we might be able to restart our species' ability to reproduce. But it would be complex. It would require precise medical procedures. And it would require a willing human participant." All eyes turned to Thomas. He understood what was being asked. His genetic material could save an entire species. Catherine had married him partly for this reason, but now it was real. Now it was not theory or hope. It was a genuine possibility. "I will help," Thomas said without hesitation. "However I can." The medical procedures were unlike anything Thomas had ever experienced. For 3 days he was placed in chambers filled with strange light. Machines scanned his body at the molecular level. Samples of his genetic material were taken and analyzed. Scientists studied how his DNA functioned, how it replicated, how it stored information. Then they began the treatments on Catherine. The process was long and careful. Medical experts worked to combine Thomas's genetic material with Catherine's in ways that had never been attempted before. They used advanced technology that Thomas barely understood. They modified genetic sequences. They rebuilt cellular structures. They introduced new DNA patterns into Catherine's body. For a week, Catherine lay in a medical chamber, unconscious and transformed. Thomas sat beside her, watching the displays that showed her body changing at a molecular level. He saw her genetic decline begin to slow. He saw the damage that had been accumulating for centuries begin to repair itself. He watched hope become reality. When Catherine finally woke, she was different. Her hair had regained some of its natural darkness. Her eyes were brighter. Her skin seemed to have more life in it. She sat up slowly, and when she looked at Thomas, he saw tears in her eyes. "I can feel it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "The decline is stopping. My body is healing itself. Thomas, you have saved my entire civilization." Word of the successful treatment spread through the empire like wildfire. Scientists from every corner of the galaxy wanted to study the procedure. Zalthari, who had been losing hope, began to believe that their species could survive. The genetic key that had been hidden in human DNA for millions of years had finally been found. The conspirators, facing evidence of their betrayal and now witnessing the cure for the Zalthari decline, saw their power completely destroyed. Many chose to accept exile rather than face execution. The empire fractured into new factions, but under Catherine's leadership, it began to heal. Catherine stood with Thomas on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. "You came here as a soldier," she said, taking his hand. "A simple warrior sent on a diplomatic mission. But you became something far greater. You became the bridge between two worlds. You saved my people." Thomas looked at this ancient being who had ruled for 710 years, and he saw something he had never seen before. He saw hope. He saw peace. He saw the beginning of something new. "We did this together," he said simply. And together they looked toward the future. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen so many world leaders gathered in one place. Representatives from 1,000 different planets and species stood together, their differences set aside for this historic moment. Thomas stood with Catherine as they entered the chamber. He wore a formal uniform that blended human military tradition with the elegant robes of the Zalthari Empire. Catherine wore the ceremonial dress of the Empress, but today she was not ruling alone. The chief senator of the assembly stood and addressed the gathered leaders. "We are here today to recognize the contributions of two very different beings who saved not one civilization but many. Empress Catherine of the Zalthari and Soldier Thomas of Earth have demonstrated that cooperation between species is not just possible, it is necessary for our survival. Thomas felt nervous as all eyes turned toward them. He was not comfortable with praise. He was a soldier trained to follow orders and complete missions. But this was different. This was about something much larger than military duty. The chief senator continued, the genetic discoveries made through the union of human and Zalthari science have provided solutions for 7 other species facing similar genetic decline. The Krell, the Centrii, the Voxthar, and 4 others have all begun treatment based on the pioneering work done here. Millions of lives will be saved because of this alliance. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The chief senator made the formal announcement. Earth is hereby elevated from colonial status to full membership in the Galactic Council. Humanity will have equal voice in all decisions affecting the galaxy. We welcome your species as true partners in building our future. The chamber erupted in celebration. Different alien species made sounds in their own ways. Some cheered, some created harmonious tones, some flashed colors of joy. Thomas felt Catherine squeeze his hand. When he looked at her, she was smiling. A real smile, not the diplomatic smile of an empress, but the genuine smile of someone who had found something precious. In the weeks that followed, Earth's representatives arrived at the Galactic Council. They were diplomats, scientists, military leaders, and philosophers. They brought with them the knowledge and strength of human civilization. But more importantly, they brought something the galaxy had been lacking, a fresh perspective. Human creativity, human courage, and human willingness to see problems differently began to influence decisions across the Empire. Trade began to flow between Earth and thousands of other worlds. Human technology was shared with alien species. Alien technology was brought to Earth, advancing human science by centuries in mere months. Young humans began to study at the great universities of the galaxy. Young aliens began to visit Earth to learn about human art, music, literature, and philosophy. But not everything was peaceful. Some factions within the Zalthari Empire still resisted the new order. They believed that humanity could not be trusted. They believed that sharing power with an alien species was a sign of weakness. There were protests. There were minor acts of sabotage. There were senators who refused to accept human representatives in their chambers. Catherine handled these challenges with the wisdom of her 710 years. She did not crush the opposition with force. Instead, she invited the most vocal critics to meet with Thomas and human scientists. She showed them the genetic data proving that humans carried the key to their species' survival. She demonstrated that cooperation was not weakness but strength. One by one, the skeptics began to understand. Thomas, for his part, worked tirelessly to build bridges between worlds. He traveled to different planets, meeting with leaders and ordinary citizens alike. He told them the story of how a human soldier and an ancient empress had learned to trust each other. He showed them that beings from completely different worlds with different biology, different cultures, and different values could work together for the common good. On Earth, a monument was erected to commemorate the alliance. It showed a human and a Zalthari standing back to back, looking out toward the stars. Millions of humans came to see it and understand what their species had become. They were no longer alone in the universe. They were part of something larger and grander than anything their ancestors could have imagined. Catherine underwent another series of genetic treatments. Her body continued to heal. Her species began to have children again, healthy, vital children with genetic material from both Zalthari and human ancestry. These children represented hope. They represented the future. They were proof that 2 species could create something beautiful together. One evening, Thomas and Catherine stood together on the observation deck of the Imperial Palace. Below them, the capital city of the Zalthari Empire spread out in a landscape of crystal towers and gardens that seemed impossible. In the distance, ships from 100 different worlds moved through the sky, traveling to trade, to learn, to cooperate. Do you remember, Catherine asked, when you first arrived here? You were afraid. You thought I would be old and cruel. You thought this marriage was a trap. Thomas laughed. I was terrified, he admitted. I thought I was going to be a prisoner or a sacrifice. And now? Catherine asked, turning to look at him. Thomas looked at this being who had ruled for 710 years in solitude. He saw the strength in her eyes, but he also saw something new. He saw contentment. He saw peace. He saw someone who was no longer carrying the weight of her empire alone. Now, Thomas said, I understand that sometimes the most dangerous journeys lead to the greatest discoveries. I came here as a soldier sent on a diplomatic mission. But I found something more valuable than any military victory. I found partnership. I found trust. I found purpose. Catherine placed her hand over his heart. You taught me something in these short months that 710 years could not teach me, she said. You taught me that ruling alone is survival. But building with someone you trust, that is legacy. That is what creates a future worth living for. Below them, the galaxy continued to turn. Peace was not complete. Challenges still existed. But for the first time in 1,000 years there was hope. Real, genuine, achievable hope. And it had begun with a human soldier brave enough to stand beside an empress and say, I will trust you and you can trust me. The new era was rising. And it belonged to all of them.